Things change fast in the basketball world, and every year that passes comes with both rising new stars and older stars gradually regressing. This season, of course, is no different, and while it's obviously exciting to watch the newer, younger talent develop and rise to the top, it can be equally difficult to watch some of your favorite stars of the past struggle as they age. This brings us to today's video, where we'll be discussing 5 former dominant star players that this season look completely washed up. Their best days are easily behind them, they can no longer be relied upon to lead a team, and while they still may flash glimpses of great performances, they're just not able to replicate it anywhere nearly as consistently. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but it also very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. The first washed-up former star we'll be discussing today is Klay Thompson of the Dallas Mavericks. Klay's a 5-time All-Star who at the height of his powers was one of the most dangerous sharpshooters the game of basketball has ever seen. His time in Golden State next to Steph Curry in the backcourt will go down as the most unbelievable shooting backcourt of all time, and while he may not have ever been the most complete scorer, he helped revolutionize the popularity of high-volume three-point shooting. Injuries set him back a few years unfortunately, and since his return from those injuries, he hasn't really been the same. Over the last few seasons, he was still an objectively efficient shooter, even if he wasn't producing at the level that he used to produce at, but the same cannot be said this year, which is very unfortunate for the Mavericks, who just signed him in free agency. Klay is scoring the fewest points per game he's put up since his rookie season, putting up 12.6 points per game, and he's not even an efficient scorer anymore, making just 38% of his shots and 36% of his threes. He's always been a pretty flawed player offensively outside of his shooting ability, as he's never had the tightest handle or greatest ability to create good looks for himself off the dribble, plus his shot selection was always questionable. He just used to be able to get away with making those tough shots because of how good of a shooter he was. With that no longer being the case though, his weaknesses are getting exposed even more, he's shooting his team out of games far more often, and is approaching liability status. The next washed-up former star we'll be discussing today is Paul George of the Philadelphia 76ers. George was seen as the biggest marquee free agent signing from this past summer, and the 76ers were hoping they were getting a player that could help take them to the next level, but instead they're getting the worst version of Paul George that we've seen in over a decade, and with him being 34 years old, it's getting tougher and tougher to believe in him reaching that former level. It needs to be said that injuries have definitely factored into the derailment of the start of his 76ers tenure, but injuries have unfortunately been hampering him for years now, and yet his production when he was healthy and on the court has never looked this bad. George has played in 10 games so far this season, and in those games he's averaging about 16 points per game, which is the fewest he's averaged since 2012, while also shooting a career worst 40% from the field and 33% from 3. He's struggling to create the space that he used to off the dribble, he's taking a ton of difficult, low-quality shots, and you can see he's trying to do too much out there at times, struggling to fit into his new team. There's a chance that George's max contract ends up being a disastrous albatross, and while he could still improve moving forward, his days as a star may be fully over. The next washed-up former star we'll be discussing today is Jrue Holiday of the Boston Celtics. Holiday's numbers started to dip last season, but he was still providing a massive impact on both ends of the floor to the eventual NBA champions. Last year, Jrue was averaging about 12.5 points, but it was because he just didn't have to take as many shots as he did on his former stops of his career, and such a stacked team around him alleviated that pressure. He was still shooting a highly efficient 48% from the field and 43% from 3 last year, while also remaining one of the best perimeter defenders in the game, but this season, you cannot say the same about him. Holiday is now scoring about 12 points per game, shooting far less efficiently, making 44% of his shots and 33% of his threes. He's visibly losing a step, and the most telling metric of all is the fact that the Celtics have actually been 2.4 points worse per 100 possessions with him on the court compared to when he's on the bench. The next washed-up former star we'll be discussing today is Russell Westbrook of the Denver Nuggets. Westbrook's a former MVP winner who at the peak of his powers was one of the most unstoppably athletic forces the league has seen. He was a walking triple-double, he got to the rim at will, and he was one of the game's best passers for quite some time. As he's gotten older though, his glaring weaknesses have started to become even more emphasized as his athletic prowess has started to evade him. Westbrook's one of the most heavily debated athletes of the modern era, with so many staunch defenders and an equal amount of dedicated haters, but over the last few seasons, even while he was starting to be over the hill, he was still finding ways to be effective. This season, he was brought into Denver to be a spark off of the bench for a group that desperately needed some depth, but the combination of him now being 36 years old and a pretty terrible fit for how the Nuggets like to run things has led to some disastrous minutes from him. The Russell Westbrook experience comes with more defensive lapses than you would like, it comes with poor shot selection, and it comes with heavy on-ball usage. The Nuggets are a team that like having the ball moving freely with active cutters and shooters throughout the lineup, and Westbrook is both not a reliable shooter or an effective off-ball player. Westbrook has also never necessarily been the most efficient player, but this season he's shooting worse from the field than he ever has in his entire career, and on top of all of this, the Nuggets are a whopping 22 points worse per 100 possessions with him on the court, emphasizing how disastrous his minutes can get. And finally, the last washed-up former star we'll be discussing today is Kyle Lowry of the Philadelphia 76ers. Lowry's an NBA champion and a 6-time All-Star who is very clearly at the end of the road for his career. At 38 years old, Lowry is a complete shell of his former self on both ends of the floor, and while he does bring savvy veteran leadership and an impressive ability to draw charges, the rest of his game is long gone. He somehow still starts a lot of games at point guard for Philadelphia this year and is playing about 23 minutes per game, but he's putting up just 6 points per game, shooting the ball a worrying 37% from the field and 34% from 3. He's noticeably slow out there, his three-point shot no longer falls at a reliable enough rate to justify his minutes, and as has been a trend throughout this video, the team is also way worse with him out on the court than they are with him on the bench, as the Sixers are 14 points worse per 100 possessions with him out there. He shouldn't be anything more than a locker room presence that can help the younger guys behind the scenes at this point, yet he's still one of the most prominent players in the team's backcourt rotation, which is definitely a factor in why the Sixers are sitting near the bottom of the standings right now. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about these over-the-hill players. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.